Well, the forecast for today in Phoenix is hot. Bienvenidos, worldwide fans of the planet's hottest entertainment with an edge. Jaime En Fuego here, and I welcome you to my namesake program, Enfuegotainment. Dan Rizzle. And yesterday, I finally, after being out for nearly a week, got around to watching the newest Spike Lee joint, talking about the Five Bloods, and that review just went up yesterday on my channel. But even though I had something different planned for this being a Thursday, when I do a retro Fuego review, when I look back at stuff, I decided that it was very appropriate for me to revisit the first Spike Lee movie that I ever saw, long before I checked out He Got Game and Summer of Sam and Inside Man and She Hate Me. Obviously Black Klansman from last year, which I absolutely loved, one of my top 3 films of the year. So Do the Right Thing, I had not seen since, boy, 6th grade, so I think I was like 12. So 6 years or so after it had already come out. In July of 1989, it had already made its debut initially in May at the Cannes Film Festival over in France. But yeah, so that film came out in the hot-ass summer of '89, and 6 years later, I saw it. Some older classmates showed it to me over at a friend's house. I grew up not getting to watch a lot of R-rated stuff, and most of it that I got to actually check out, whether it was like more edgy cinema or music or whatever, was with the kids on the playground and stuff. And so yeah, this film definitely, it messed me up when I was a kid, but I had not revisited it since then. And with so much of how life is sickeningly cyclical as far as race relations go in this country, things heat the hell up and then they simmer down for a little bit and then they heat back up because of the fact that obviously nothing has ever really been properly fixed. So I was like, I need to revisit this movie, and I just did today, and damn, it hits as hard, if not so much harder, because growing up as a kid in the early 90s was when I was really kind of starting to get an idea of stuff that was happening with the LA riots over the horrible treatment of Rodney King, and just things that had obviously happened in the late 80s that I didn't completely understand at the time because I was just too young for that. And so I knew when I was starting to get a grasp of stuff that some stuff was boiling over, but also that seriously, the coolest shit was coming from, just black creators. I mean, I was listening to, NWA and then later on Tupac and, just everybody. I was more so, being here in Phoenix, I was more so with the West Coast sound. I listened to a little bit, from the East Coast, but nowhere near as much. And then, you had like, Bone Thugs who migrated over from Cleveland, if I remember correctly, and stuff. But yeah, man, rap was definitely the thing amongst most kids my age, and not just white kids either. I mean, we are legit talking. I went to a school, we were a lower income, white family. My mom worked days. My dad worked nights teaching, and so the school that we went to had ties specifically with the Native American reservations here in Arizona. There's a few white kids and there's a few black kids at my school, but it was really mostly Hispanics, primarily Mexicans, obviously, with how close we are to the border down south and everything, and Native kids. And yet, didn't matter which one of us it was, we got some rock from older parents and friends or whatever, lots that didn't go to that school, kids in the neighborhood or whatever, but like hip-hop was the thing, man. And so that was my first love from kids my own age that I looked up to. And then, I mean, hard-hitting films that came post Do the Right Thing, obviously, Menace to Society, Boys in the Hood, stuff like that was really, and even the comedic aspect, man. I remember seeing Living Color distinctively and loving the hell out of it. There's just Jim Carrey on there. Everybody else, though, the entire Wayne team, Keenan and all of the siblings, man. What a terrific and seminal show that we had there. And then even, spin-off stuff, like I remember watching like Martin and who is in this movie, for God's sake. So, beyond trying to cred myself up, I'm just saying that, I definitely revered the artistic capabilities and just cutting edge nature of new stuff that was happening back then. But yet, even beyond that, when I'm riding around in the vehicle with my best friend's father, for instance, he was really into, just old 50s, 60s stuff, and that's where I was exposed to the Motown sound, and that's where, Marvin and Stevie, obviously, and, probably biggest for me was, Ruffin and the Temps, Love the Tops, too. So I definitely knew just the extent of the artistic just brilliance that was there. I didn't really until I started becoming more cognizant of the news, and as I grew older, obviously, and studied more at school and made more black friends that gave me a proper education about some of this stuff. And that was when I finally got around to seeing Do the Right Thing. And Danny Aiello, I want to say, our main guy playing Sal in this. And then you've also got, Mookie, played by none other than Spike, who wrote this. He produced it along with Ernest Dickinson, whatever, it doesn't matter. And he also directed it. And so this was his third film, if I'm not mistaken. Second one in the Brooklyn series of stuff that he did that also had like, oh boy, Crooklyn was another one I remember. Anyway, I'm not going to wax intellectually about any of this stuff, and I'm not going to, tout my, affinity and respect. It is deep, it is steadfast, and it has remained very much there to this day, which is why I wanted to revisit this film. And it's filled with so many awesome, amusing characters in this, and also poignant ones that bring big time stuff to light, and yet it's very lighthearted for the most part, with the exception of some times where it gets exceptionally hard-hitting, most notably in the finale. But yeah, man, bugging out, hell of a character, and Radio Raheem, Ossie Davis as Demare, he is so just belovedly awesome in this. Ruby, oh god, damn it. Mother Sister, god damn it. I'm trying to remember every single name, and it's going to be tough, but, forgetting Samuel L. Jackson was in this, forgetting that John Turturro was in this, very notably forgettable for the mentality of his character and whatnot, being Pino, Sal's son. This is just, it's chock-a-block, as my father would say, full of so many amazingly talented actors and actresses in this, and, yeah, it's a hell of an ensemble, and revisiting it, I could definitely see why Kevin Smith, another one of my favorite directors, held this film in such high regard when he was trying to craft Clerks, because of the fact that there are just so many of these interesting scenes of just characters hanging out, just talking, and the dynamic and the musings amongst all of them, the kind of busting each other's balls, the comfortability, the strained hostility at times. And yeah, that's the thing that is... At the beginning of the film, we know what's said about the temperature rising, and everybody knows, and me most notably here in Phoenix, being a born and raised lifelong desert dweller, man, that legit, it gets so ridiculously hot here. And I know the humidity factor when it's 100 might be a lot tougher to deal with over in, the city, as opposed to, here in Phoenix and the surrounding, valley, where, yeah, we get up to 115, we push 120 a lot of the time, but it's that dry heat, we don't experience anything, even close until we have that brief monsoon season. But I can attest to the fact that, yeah, people are a shitload more volatile, they are more on edge, and it really heightens the likelihood of conflict. And that's, especially when there's tensions here already, we don't have this sort of tension, thank the Lord, at least with, African Americans anywhere near to the degree in other, parts of the country, the South, and various others. But then again, the most recent thing happened in Minnesota, so go fucking figure. But, or at least the most notorious that set so much of this, just getting right back at it into motion. But yeah, man, I can attest to, hostility. Our president wants to put up a wall, man, because we have a different sort of racial tension here, and it's been going on for, at least the last couple election cycles, if not even stretching further back, and very much so with the state government. Our governor, most notably, is, even though here in Phoenix we're pretty blue, and I'm a registered independent because I'm disillusioned with aspects from both sides, but yeah, our governor is typically red and extremely right-wing Republican, and I know some good Republican people who do not subscribe to the stereotypes that they have, as a party, have found themselves falling back into. But there's a lot of bad too, man, and but then again, there's irrationality and short-sightedness on the other side too. It's just, we are, for all the steps that I saw us take forward as a society, especially as we were like hitting the late 90s and then went through 9/11, which did unify us to a degree, and then we got all kinds of other tensions about another war and things of that nature. But I felt like we did take steps forward as a society with regards to some of the tensions that this film explores, and yet we're right back in the thick of it, man. It's, as I said at the beginning of this, it simmers down, then it boils back up, because cause will, man, and, those who, don't learn from the past are damned to repeat it, in my color, unfortunately, and just some mentalities that won't seem to go away. And, I also have black friends who have been like, yeah, there's some of us who still have a, just, what's the word that I'm looking for? I mean, they still have anger and resentment because of all of those past transgressions. And so there's some things that we have to meet one another in the middle, and we have to bridge proverbial gaps, and we have to figure things out in a much better fashion than we have. But back to the film, man. So yeah, these awesome and amusing and very well-developed characters that Spike put together for this film. I mean, yes, they all have their little, comedic bits, but then there are also moments of wisdom. But the one thing that I will most definitely give Spike a lot of credit for is the fact that every character in this film, except for maybe our two, Jade and Mother Sister, maybe, these women of wisdom that we have in this film, but pretty much everybody else has their own flaws. Even Aussie, man, as the mayor, there's people, the kids ridiculing him for, just being a drunk, and for, not being there for, family that is, 5 crying, starving kids and stuff like that. So everybody is kind of flawed and has a moment of either just being an asshole or, the scene that I had completely forgotten about, where we go from each different sort of prejudice towards a different race. I mean, we have Totoro just railing, and it's all these one takes. I think it starts with Spike, and then it goes to Totoro, and then it goes into a couple other characters. And I mean, we've got Dominicans in this movie. They're either Dominicans or Puerto Ricans. I mean, there is a Latino presence in this too. And I'm just thinking suddenly, for whatever reason, briefly, that everybody's drinking Miller in this movie, so you know where the beer sponsor at least came from. But that's of ill importance, man. And then you've got the Koreans running the shop, and the dudes who I kind of got the vibe they were, Jamaican. They got prejudice there too, and so that string within the scene, and then thankfully, Samuel L. Jackson as our kind of narrator DJ, he busts in and he's just like, hold up, as in, we need to really try our damnedest to work past these stereotypes, these prejudice mentalities, and yet, the heat is rising and those negative energies are escalating. But I gotta give Samuel L. Jackson credit one other time. One of my favorite scenes in this movie that I'd forgotten about is where he's spouting off at, I believe it's WELOVE, the radio station, man. He starts spouting names of all the artists that they play on there, and he just goes through everything from, Prince to New Edition to Duke Ellington to Thelonious Monk to Otis Redding to, I mean, he just, every different, going back to jazz, and all the various iterations of it. I mean, we're talking, big band and bop and all of those great, black jazz leaders and stuff like that. And, to the modern, I mean, he's dropping Salt and Pepper and just all these other, stuff that was happening at the time, and everything in between. It is a string of so many artists, and it just made me smile, man, because I was just like, such an immense amount of talent over decades and decades and decades. I mean, one of the favorite classes that I ever took was where I learned so much about everything post-Civil War and all those iterations musically that arose from, the initial ragtime and playing on the upbeat, and as a musician myself, just learning about stuff, because everything musically that I knew about, was pretty much 50s onward. And when I took this class, it was called American Jazz and Popular Music, that went through, just the evolution of all of these sounds and, various areas of the South, Memphis and New Orleans, and, just the various iterations of jazz. We started out with bop, and, at least after ragtime, and the development, and then, the big band, which, brought in, I guess, more of a multi-ethnic sort of biz, but as always, I can definitely attest that the dudes of my skin color have come in and, you know, copped the sound, and not necessarily even copped it, because I mean, think of, you know, where Floyd took their name and the fact that, you know, Sabbath and, you know, Zeppelin, all these guys, their favorite musicians, the ones that inspired them were all these American blues artists and guitarists, and with good fucking reason, man. And so, you know, credit where it's due, obviously, but just hearing Sam Jackson, as he's credited in this, you know, just spout off that line of names, and it is so extensive and diverse in the aspects of the sound, but the soulfulness of all of it, man. I mean, I'm almost out of breath getting so excited by it. But yeah, Spike's character, he's an interesting enigma in this, because, you know, you can tell that he is conflicted in various ways. He's got this boss that, you know, he's trying to defend constantly, but I mean, it's the whole conflict with bugging out early in the film over having all the Italian American white dudes, you know, on his wall, even though Brooklyn over the years was, you know, just becoming, you know, much more so of an African American population, and he's like, I've been here 25 years, I'll put whoever the hell I want on my wall, blah blah blah. And so, yeah, even though he's kind of, him and the Korean shop across the street, bodega, whatever you want to call it, yeah, they're the two that kind of stick out like a sore thumb, and kind of nowhere near as bad as the guy in the Celtics jersey who smudges the Nikes, or excuse me, the Jordans. But nonetheless, so I guess that was back when Nike was still making Jordans. But yeah, what am I saying? In any event, yeah, he's caught in this rock and a hard place of sorts, because he's trying to be a mediator initially. And, you know, Ossie kind of becomes that character later in the film, especially at the end, as crazy as all that stuff gets. But yet he's also conflicted with, you know, the demands of fatherhood, and yet also with making money. And Rosie Perez as Tina, she's really giving him hell for it constantly. She's like, you haven't come to see your son in a week. And yet, you know, when he does get around to going and seeing her, she's just cussing up a storm and really setting a bad example for the child. And so this is back to where I was saying, credit to Spike for just letting it hang out, man, and being real and raw about, you know, some of the flaws of these characters. And yeah, as we get to the deja vu aspect of watching this movie, which is really terrible, I guess if you've never seen Do the Right Thing before, obviously do the right thing and watch this movie, because it's in the Library of Congress for a reason. It's been so celebrated by critics across the board, over 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, nearly 100 critics, all that different stuff. But a lot of people don't care about that stuff. If I enjoy a movie, I don't need critics or a cinema score, you know, to validate what I like and what I respect and what connects with me. Nonetheless, yeah, it's got those accolades for a reason. Spike was nominated for his screenplay, didn't win, unfortunately, but Best Supporting Actor for Danny, he got that too. I forgot his brother was in this movie too as one of the cops. He's at least one of the more sympathetic cops, because y'all know what goes down with the other big brutish looking mofo. And it all stems, spoilers, I'm just going into it now because now is the time. Earlier in the film, we see the slow cruise of the cops, those two, and they're like, what a waste. And that mentality still being the case in a lot of officers all over the place. Not all officers. I've known, you know, quite a few through, you know, family and friends and stuff like that, who are good, honest people. But unfortunately, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely a lot of the time. I'm not here to throw my personal deep political opinions out about all of this, but it's a very tough situation with needing protection, but yet, you know, just not having accountability. And so that's the biggest danger in this regard. But aside from everybody knowing that, the end of this film and with what goes down also just proposes the question, can we be peaceful, or can we, you know, do we have to go about it in a more forcible fashion to get the necessary results? And so, you know, peaceful marches, you can have intensity, but when you get into rioting and looting and just mass destruction and stuff like that, that's at least where I personally just, I raise an eyebrow a little bit, because I don't necessarily know what that sort of chaos, potentially controlled chaos, is a different situation. That sort of just mass madness, that doesn't necessarily help. And all too often, the innocent who don't have that inherent hatred get caught in the crossfire, which is obviously terrible. So as I continue with spoilers and going to the end of this film, so that we have our dude who has one of my favorite other monologues in the film. We're talking Radio Raheem, man, and he's got the love and the hate on his hands, and he talks about, you know, the ebb and flow and the balance and the struggle between those two, and he gives some great biblical analogies about the left hand killing Cain and just, or Abel or something. God damn it, I'm trying to remember the extent of it, but long story short, he gives a very great, just, I mean, bit that Spike wrote for him, and it's delivered tremendously. And his character ends up hooking up with Bugging Out, who is pissed off at Sal about just not getting respect and, you know, just kicking him out of the restaurant early in the film. And so that initial conflict leads him to start talking with Radio Raheem, who, to be fair, he was acting obnoxious, acting like an asshole, you know, going around busting, you know, the Public Enemy, Fight the Power, which I didn't actually know that song was originally written specifically and released on Motown for this film as the soundtrack, as like the main theme, basically. The rest of the music, man, Spike's father, who I know scored a lot of his films, if I'm not mistaken, does such a soulful, amazing job with from the sax we get at the beginning to some of the piano work that's a little more slow and subdued. I mean, yeah, there's a reason they collaborated, and obviously talent didn't fall far from the tree, just in a different regard in Spike's case. But so yeah, Raheem is going around, he's bumping on his big ass juke, you know, the PE throughout most of, sort of pretty much the entire movie anytime we see him. And yeah, he does go into Sal's early, and he won't turn his music off, and so that creates a little bit of tension. But obviously, like we said, you know, people are on edge, and the volatility has a much higher probability in this case. So inevitably, you know, Radio Raheem, he turns it down, gets his slices, pieces out. But once he starts talking to Buggin later on, they decide that even though nobody else wants to go and, you know, boycott and, you know, just, you know, thumb their nose at Sal, most of the people they talk to are like, man, I grew up on this pizza, you know, whatever. And so this is where we get to the real just hitting way too close to home, tough for me to watch. I would imagine, you know, for any African American, a million times tougher than anything I could ever comprehend. But as somebody who is sickened by what I'm seeing in society, and just this sort of despicable, narrow-minded mentality from a lot of people that look like me, not the hair necessarily, hopefully, but yeah, man, this is where the whole final confrontation, it goes into the stratosphere. We've heard Totoro, who, you know, he's been dropping the N-bomb to his dad, and yet Sal, you know, remains pretty steadfast and doesn't fall into those mentalities. You can tell he does not have the element of just brooding hatred that his son does. Sal doesn't have it, man. Totoro, he's on another level. He's off the rails, despite Mook giving him, you know, shit at one time in the movie and saying, "Who's your favorite basketball player? Who's your favorite?" You know, just, and they're all black guys, you know. And he's like, "Well, Prince, you know, Prince isn't exactly black. He's not red." And he goes into this thing where he's trying to explain himself, but it doesn't make a goddamn lick of sense. And, you know, Spike very just notably and importantly puts it right in his face, man. So definitely something, and that's another pivotal scene that I should have mentioned earlier. There's just so many in this, and I don't want to talk forever and ever and ever about this, because I doubt nobody wants to listen to me, you know, this guy at least talk for 30 minutes about this film as much as I, you know, the criterion that I have on the shelf over there. I should actually pull that out for that. Anyway, yeah, man, it's just, when we finally get to this bit at the end and the conflict finally boils over and Sal loses his cool in the midst of, you know, Raheem and Buggin coming in and blasting the music and demanding food, even though Sal right before had actually shown some coolness, and he was letting some of the younger peeps like, you know, Martin Lawrence and a couple of the other kids in to get some slices, even though he was already closed up and stuff. He's like, let them on in, let them on in. So you can tell his heart is not completely just, you know, tainted and terrible. like his kid, you know, that the Pino, that's Turturro's character is. Pino and, what is it, Tino, the other kid? I don't know. There's a younger brother who is definitely much closer and cooler with Mook, and they have some great scenes talking back and forth with one another. But it's where Buggin and, you know, Raheem come in that Sal goes over the edge and he finally loses it. And it's not to say that it's the most toxically terrible, wrong place, wrong situation, wrong time sort of thing. It's like this perfect storm of things all coming together, in all honesty here. And it goes from Sal finally throwing some N-bombs out there like a piece of shit, and then on top of that, taking out a baseball bat and destroying the Public Enemy broadcaster. And that's when this conflict gets from very heatedly verbal to physical. We get like a borderline little mini brawl going on inside the restaurant that in turn spills out into the streets. And this is where deja vu of the most despicable and deadly variety in what happens with Raheem and, you know, getting choked out, man, and just the whole scene of it that's going down. And yeah, he's killed by this officer. And so horrible, like I didn't even know if I wanted to do spoilers for this video, because just watching that and seeing the emotion, especially from this tremendous ensemble of actors, and seeing Ruby crying and just, you know, just wailing in the streets, and you know, various others, and, you know, to have gone from the glee early in the film of busting open and, you know, the fire hydrant and dancing in the water in the streets, to being in the streets and experiencing this. It is the most horrible transition, night and fucking day. And it's like a knife twisting, man. It really truly is. And for a second, I was like, as I was rewatching this and I see Mook throw the trash can through the glass, I was like, would those cops have shown up? You know, if he hadn't done that, did he do the right thing necessarily? And I know that there's debate as to whether he did or not, but a line that I caught as the melee was, you know, after it had happened, that made me change my mind, is I was like, oh, Sal's kid had already called the cops, is what somebody says. And so they were coming either way, you know? So that kind of let Spike off the hook for me a little bit, and his character. And yeah, what a rough way to end this. And I mean, even seeing Ossie Davis, you know, as the mayor, trying to break stuff up when, you know, they had spilled outside this conflict, this brawl, this fight, you know, this nastiness, and he's like saying something to the effect of, and this is me verbatim, he's like, we need to stop this now before, you know, it turns into something way worse that, you know, we will regret, or we can, you know, whatever. It's like, hey, we can butt heads, like butting heads to this extent, words as opposed to, you know, fists, that's where, you know, and we get those Malcolm and, you know, Martin quotes at the very end, you know, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King at the very end of the film. And I know Spike did that very distinctively to show, you know, that there's two sides to this coin, as far as, you know, one is that violence doesn't solve anything, and, you know, an eye for an eye leaves us blind. But then Malcolm talking about, well, you know, I don't necessarily condone violence, but I do condone self-defense, and violence, when it's self-defense, it makes sense. God, I'm trying to remember the extent of the quote, but I hope I've given it the proper diligence and respect, and in the fact that it honestly, when it's self-defense, it makes the most sense. I forget the exact quote, but nonetheless, ending the movie with both of those statements, and how they're complementary to a degree, but also showed the slightly differing mentalities as to how to approach this sort of oppression. This is such a fantastic film, and I know it means so much more to the black community and all my African American friends, but this is a film that needs to be seen by everyone. Gender, race, color, creed, religion, lack thereof, whatever, because it's hard-hitting and it's controversial, yeah, but we have to ask the tough questions to get the tough solutions, to get the complex solutions. And that's what this film does so splendidly and yet so heartbreakingly. and it's amazing. It's definitely one of the greatest American films that I've ever seen, and I've been reviewing films here on YouTube since, I've been a journalist since 2009, and I've been specializing in film since 2014. So, yeah, I love my genre stuff. I love my science fiction and my horror and fantasy, and I like to escape this world, and that's why I love that sort of stuff. That's why I gravitate towards that sort of cinema, because films like this are a lot tougher to watch, because real life horrors, in my estimation, are far fucking scarier, man. Like leaps and bounds beyond it's almost like in horror when I said, like, I like Monsters and Creatures, for instance, and that's why, it's out of this world, it's imaginary, it's supernatural, it's fantasy, it's whatever. When I see men and women inflicting harm on other men and women, it just cuts me so much more to the core. And yeah, do the right thing and see Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. I know I'm being redundant, but gracias everybody, danke, arigato, merci, thank you so very much if you tuned in to the full extent of this very lengthy video. I have been Jaime En Fuego, and y'all can find moi on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, just like you see spelled below. Typically, my coverage is quite lighthearted here. Star Wars and comic stuff and comedies and whatnot. I do love to delve into more serious things from time to time, if I'm in the proper mindset. I took a week away from YouTube, despite being in the midst of this pandemic before it merged into something far scarier in a lot of ways. I'd been doing videos every day for months since relaunching this channel, and yet I had to take a week off specifically to process so much of what we've seen. And if you do a like, a share, subscribe. Just thinking about this film even more during the midst of this lengthy discussion about it. It's getting me, man, so I definitely need to wrap it up at this particular point. But yes, a like, a share, subscribe, and a comment as to if you think I'm just being I don't know. It's tough to, I feel so sincere and, just so sympathetic and disgusted by so much that I see, and yet I know that that's not enough, and taking action is a much bigger thing. I'm doing all I can, but get out, make your voice be known, and do what's right. Be good to your fellow man. That's one of the biggest things. If you do want to take a look away, at least for a moment, and you like horror movies and scary, spectacular stuff, youtube.com/The Horror Show channel is where I've been doing that for a number of years. We've got over 33,000 subscribers over there. We do at least a video every day, reviews of film and television, and yeah, excited for a lot that is coming as the year goes on, at least as far as creativity goes, whether it's music, whether it's movies. That's what I relish, and that's where, my heart will always lie. But there are definitely bigger things out there for us to take into consideration and keep our eye upon. So, I've been Fuego. Y'all have been rad status as per always, and until the real Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, Cinemigos. Constant to viewers and readers alike, say thank you once more, but I'm hopeful we share more of this film palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, stay safe and watch more movies, most notably more from the awesome Spike Lee.